Hey, Project Zion podcast listeners, this is Blake Smith, Project Manager for Project Zion Podcast. Recently, host Robin Linkhart sat down with Joey Williams, whose call to the office of apostle will be considered by the upcoming Community of Christ World Conference. The conversation was so good that we've split it into 2 episodes. This is part 1 of that conversation. We hope you'll enjoy.
Welcome to Nice to Matcha, a Project Zion podcast series where we meet new people, leaders, movers, and shakers. I'm your host, Robin Linkhart, and today I'm here with Joey Williams, who has been called to serve in Community of Christ Counsel of 12 Apostles. If that call is sustained in legislative session at the 2025 World Conference, Joey will be ordained during a worship service at that same conference. It's great to have you with us today, Joey.
It's great to be back on Project Zion, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Now, Joey, you have been a guest on Project Zion before, but today we are going to get to know you much better. So let's start with the basics. Why don't you take a few minutes to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Well, I'm Joey. Joey Williams. That's really important, actually, because I was just telling my mom the other day, I do not connect when people say Joe. It's really important that I'm a Joey. In fact, when I meet other Joes, I never put together that we both kind of come from the same name, Joseph. But that's my nickname is Joey, and I've kind of always gone by Joey. My family actually called me Joey Carter growing up, which is interesting for Jimmy Carter, who just passed away. I was born and raised in Independence, Missouri. I was part of a family of 5 that included my dad, Bob, my mom, Judy, my brother, Jeff, and my sister, Julie. So you see the importance of J's in our naming in the family. So it was Bob, Judy, Jeff, Julie, Joey growing up. And I am the youngest. I am 10 years younger than my sister, 14 years younger than my brother. So it's almost like I either had, 4 adults in my family most of my life growing up. My sister had a son, Kyle, who is now married to Hannah, and they have 2 boys, Scotty, who's 2 years old, and Jones, who is 4.5 years old. So you can imagine everything in our family life now revolves around my nephews. So the whole world revolves around them. I work in formation ministries at the temple as a formation ministry specialist. And what that basically means is that I get to be part of the creation of resources that are used throughout the church, as well as worships and trainings that I get to be invited to out in the field. And in that role, I have worked most closely with the multi-nations team of apostles to help develop resources for the international church. So an example of that might be the booklet that we have of sharing in Community of Christ, making sure that that gets translated and published in many different languages. Swahili was the most recent one that we just finished with that.
All righty. So we're going to go back and into time, so to speak.
Okay.
And we want to hear your growing up story. Like, where did you grow up? And what was life like for you in your family and community, your interests, your hobbies? And in the midst of that story, we want to hear a little bit about where was God and faith in all of that for you?
Yeah, so like I said, I was born and raised in Independence. So in some ways, I may have had a very different experience of growing up than many people in Community of Christ, being born right down the street from the auditorium. I was actually born in the church's hospital at the time, called the sanitarium at the time. And so I was kind of surrounded by church life. My mom and dad were heavily involved. They were not only was my dad a pastor several different times while I was growing up, but they were youth leaders. So mom and dad, and I know they did at least 40 plus years as kind of the official junior high youth leaders for Central Mission, what was then called Center Stake. But they also, before that, had done youth ministry in Kingsville, Missouri, where they were before I was born, and had done many years of youth ministry there. When I was a little kid, I loved to swim. So swimming has been a part of my earliest memories. I think I was 5 or 6 when I joined the swim team that was actually held at a church pool. So where we have our mission center offices today, there used to be a swimming pool there called the campus swimming pool, and I was on the campus swim team. So swimming has just been a huge part of growing up. It's kind of that place that I go to when I want to connect with my own body, but also with my childhood. I also had a love for horses. I wanted to be a cowboy. I remember before my first day of school, I actually put my cowboy boots and my jeans and my cowboy shirt and my cowboy hat on my bed, like laid them all out before I got into bed so that all my clothes were ready for that first day of school. And I was going to go to school as a cowboy. Now, that's because Kingsville was a really important part of my whole elementary school life. We had a country store that we still had back in Kingsville while I was in grade school. And so a lot of my time would be being picked up after school and taking a 45-minute drive down into the country where my parents ran a country store. Where was God in growing up? I think there has always been a sense of being drawn to the Spirit. So this idea that there's something beyond, something more than what maybe we see at this time. And that always appealed to me. And I was very curious about it. Apparently, my mom would tell me that I would ask tons of questions about after this life, or where are the people that have gone before us? And I had a lot of answers, I guess, to that as well. She said that sometimes she was amazed at some of the weird things. And, kids say the craziest things, but sometimes they have some real insight, maybe of parts of the connection to the Spirit that we lose with time as we become too focused on the present and on the reality of things around us. But I probably developed that sense of the Spirit with those 45-minute drives down to Kingsville. So being in the car with my mom, and she certainly cultivated and nurtured within me that desire to not only recognize where the Spirit is, but to feel the Spirit's movement in my life and in the world around us. In fact, a story that my parents would both tell me quite often growing up, and this probably shaped me as they told this story over and over. I was, I guess, 4 or 5. We were at a youth camp that my parents were directing. My dad had just given some really powerful words, apparently, to the youth that were gathered there. And I was probably in the back playing, but I guess they say that it got really, really quiet. Like right after he spoke, there was just this complete silence. And out of that silence, I guess I started walking up to the front where my dad was from the back. And I was saying, "Can you feel it? Can you feel it?" And I didn't have the words to say, "Can you feel the Spirit?" But apparently I was just saying, "Can you feel it?" And so that feeling of the movement of the Spirit has kind of always been a part of my faith journey, but also it's just been a reality of my experience of life, that the Spirit is somewhat always present and always poking its way into the life that maybe we have planned. The other weird thing, and maybe it's not too weird because I've learned as I've grown up, this isn't as weird as it seemed when I started to realize what was going on. But growing up in Independence, I knew so many people out in my community life that were part of the church. So it was not unusual for my school nurse in junior high, Sherry Baker, to be a church member, or for me to go to the doctor's office and when somebody there would work, would be working there, but they would be a member of the church. Or we'd go to restaurants and see people from the community of Christ all over the place out in the community. I know at least one mayor that we had of Independence while I was growing up, kind of the main part of my adolescence. That mayor was a member of Community of Christ. And I mean, that's not to be like, ooh, Community of Christ is so involved in the community. I think what I thought of that experience growing up was Community of Christ, being a member of Community of Christ is involved, and there are unlimited possibilities of what you can do with your life and still be an integral part of this faith community. So to see people expressing their faith in their everyday roles, that fascinated me. And I think that has become, even today, what I love about the international church, of seeing how people express their faith in their everyday lives and in the jobs that they have and in the communities where they participate and in the ways that they participate in their community life.
That's fascinating. I love hearing you talk about all of that and your awareness of the presence of the Holy Spirit from a young age. And I echo what I think I heard you say is that as young human beings, sometimes we have a keener awareness of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exciting. So tell us a little bit about junior high and senior high.
Whew. Junior high and senior high. Well, junior high started out rough. So I know as soon as I could get away that my mom would let me ride my bike by myself kind of within our neighborhood. I only lived like 2 blocks away from the auditorium, but when there was a world conference, I was on my bike and up there. One of my favorite things to do was to go whenever they were preparing for the flag ceremony, and I would just roam the halls because they would be all lined up out in, the halls, and there's all these ramps in the auditorium. And these people from all these nations all around the world and all of this diversity that I had not seen, you just don't see that when I was growing up in Independence, but to have all of that in one space with all of these flags, and it's like we're the United Nations, some type of flag ceremony. But I would just roam and walk up and down those halls and just be kind of amazed to be in the presence of all of these people from places from all over the world. And that was just, it was just incredible for me to have that experience. But I would go into the balcony as well and listen to these sessions. My mom was probably a delegate. And I remember I was 11 years old and I was at a world conference where Section 156 was read. And that was a weird experience for me. It was as though all of the breath, the way I describe it from my memory is, it was as though all of the breath went out of the room when those words were read, which is really weird because going back, I mean, such a liberating text for women's ministry, calling women into priesthood roles or recognizing that women were being called into priesthood roles. And then the second part that is this, we're going to build a temple. And, this excitement of it's going to really happen, the reality of making this dream of a temple come to life. What an exciting scripture to then be shared that became scripture, with the church. What an exciting journey to be on. And yet the beginnings of that were pretty difficult. I had a youth group of about 30 youth that were just in my middle school age range. And the next Sunday when I went to school, they were like 3 or 4 or 5 of us. I mean, it was a very small group of people. And thanks to my parents being youth leaders, they worked so hard to continue to connect all of those youth. So most of the people, even though some of them, ended up coming back with a little bit of time, but my parents worked so hard to continue to connect those kids in youth camps and the different activities that we were doing. But that youth group was really important to my faith journey as well. Those times when we were just sitting in a circle, dealing with the relationships between us. I remember a time when a kid called me out right in front of my mom, who was leading a session. It called me out for being a bully. And that person eventually, of course, became one of my closest friends, because it was this space. How was a space created that was so safe that he was able to call me out right in front of, and maybe it was because my mom was there. He knew she'd take care of it. But it also was a safe space for me to face that and to deal with, okay, what is it going on? What am I doing? And how am I behaving? And how do I want to be? And I think youth group, why it's so important for young people is to create that safe space to explore not only what am I going to do with my life, which a lot of people think that's what school's about, right? But really, what type of person am I going to be? And I think youth groups do such a great job of shaping that. By the time I got into high school, I was, I don't know. I've been involved in so many different things. I love so many hobbies, and I got to be able to do so many different things like volleyball and different sports. Like I kept swimming, of course, played football until I was in high school, and then I had to make a decision between band and football. And I loved playing percussion in high school. Percussion has been a really important part of even my faith journey. My motto is make noise, which Noiz. So you spell it backwards, it's Zion. I just love this concept of that we joyfully make noise, and we praise in a joyful manner with the noises that we make. So I was really I got more involved with school things, and yet youth group still became this great place where community connection could happen in very different ways. And then, of course, the camping program. In high school, I branched out to a couple new camps. So one of those really important camps that we did was a camp called Camp Opportunity. And my mom took me there when I was 12 years old. So I really wasn't supposed to be there. I was always a camp brat, by the way. I went to every spec growing up, every spectacular at Graceland. My mom would take me. I was a spec brat the entire time. She only made me not go the year before I was supposed to go as an actual camper, so that I would kind of have this year off and actually have an experience as a camper myself. But she took me to this camp called Camp Opportunity, which is for physically, mentally, and sexually abused children. And, as my mom was always busy, and everyone is assigned, it's a one-on-one camper and staff ratio. And so, of course, I saw myself as mom's helper, or I like to call myself the first counselor in training. We didn't really say CIT back then, counselors in training, but I think I was like one of the first counselors in training. And the kid that she had was like 11 years old and I was 12 years old. So I really should have just been this kid's friend, but I took it seriously as though I was there to help my mom. And listening to that kid's story and comparing it with my story at such a young age really began to shape and mold my desire for other people to have safe spaces in their lives. And so I ended up doing Camp Opportunity for many years. So that was my other go-to camp, junior high camp, middle school camp. That stayed a really important camp, mainly because my mom and dad had been directing it, but also because it just kind of became that place that I went and was able to experience the Spirit moving. Maybe it's because we were very intentional for a week to see where the Spirit was moving in our lives. But that's why it, I think, became a sacred space that I would return to. And then I had lots of interesting opportunities. I was kind of a church hopper because I sang in a choir called the Center Place Singers. And so that was out of Stone Church, which wasn't my church in high school. I went to a different congregation, but I participated in their youth and young adult choir. And that gave me opportunities to go all over our mission center, be in different churches all the time, singing in different places around our mission center. And then because I like to sing and do music and different things, often congregations would invite me to come and do special music or be a part of their service in different ways. So those are kind of the ways that I was involved and saw the Spirit moving as I was in high school and middle school.
Wow, that is just a beautiful story, and it goes so deep in lots of different directions. I like the image of you as a church hopper, joyfully making noise across the mission center and beyond. Alrighty, so you're through high school and you're ready for the next few chapters of your life. So tell us about college and beyond for a bit, and until you get to a place of connecting with the church in a different way.
Oh gosh, talk about being a church hopper. I was also a university hopper. So I went to school. I started my college life, university life in Rochester, New York, which was actually pretty far away from a congregation. So the closest congregation was Palmyra. And the only person that lived in New York to take me was the pastor. And at the time they had 2 services. They also did a breakfast and a brunch and a lunch. And I mean, they were active, and they had 2 services as well as Sunday school class. So we had to leave Rochester at 5:30 in the morning just to get to the Palmyra congregation. So I have to be honest and let you know that I probably didn't make it to church as much as I probably should have gotten up to go to. But in the same way, that also was the first time that I was a little free to explore other faith traditions. So down in Rochester at our university, we even had a church that met in our performing arts center on Sundays. And so that was the first time that I kind of really went out and stepped into other faith spaces to see what that was like. And it was a very different experience. The music was always wonderful. It was kind of I don't want to say a mega church, but it was a large gathering of people. And, they had cell groups. And so they met kind of on smaller scale, but really it was all about that Sunday gathering and the good music and a good preacher. And that was just a very interesting experience because it was very different from my experience of Community of Christ, which was usually smaller groups that are gathering with pretty much the whole goal for the potluck afterwards to stay and have all of that community fellowship around our shared eating or going out to a meal after church. Or when I was a kid, of course, we were inviting people to our home on different Sundays to have them come and share with us in our home. At the end of that year, I had transferred to Northwestern University in Chicago. And I was excited because I really wanted to go into musical theater. I was studying opera in Rochester, but I really wanted to go into musical theater. And I changed to go to Northwestern because I thought they would have a good program for that. And before I went up for school, somebody called and said, "Do you want to go to Spec as staff?" And you usually had to wait 2 years out of high school before you could be on staff at Spec. And I jumped at it because, of course, Spectacular was is one of the greatest experiences that we offer our youth, I think, in the church, to meet youth from all over the United States, at least at the time. And of course, in our international IYF years, you meet so many other people. So I jumped at that opportunity and I go to Spec. And of course, they've got all of their recruiters up there. And throughout the week, as they were hearing what I was doing, and as I reconnected with my faith community friends who had chosen to go to Graceland from high school and people that I had met at Spec, and I reconnected with all of those people again, I changed and I decided I'm going to go to Graceland that next year. So there were two schools that I said I would never go to, which was Graceland University and the University of Missouri in Kansas City. And that's where I got my degrees, and my master's degrees are from both of those schools. So yeah, I gave in, and it ended up, socially, it was wonderful to reconnect, and such a great way to go through school, to have such a large group of people, that many of which not only shared your faith, but also just had been lifelong friends. So I think having those friends that I had known since I was a kid became really important to continue those connections and those relationships. At the end of that year, I bought a car. And so I bought a car. I was also in a boy band that I had become a part of, All for One. And so we were kind of singing all over the place, and we wanted to get a little more serious about that. So I needed to be a little closer to independence. And so I decided to change schools. So when I bought this car from a woman who worked at the School for the Deaf in Olathe, Kansas. And I was like, oh, we had a lady down the street who taught sign language growing up. There was this deaf man he was kind of famous. He was the guy at World Conference that, if you remember, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, he was there all the time. I think he lived to over 100 years old. John Steele was his name. And when I was little, I had an experience where he came by while I was doing a lemonade stand. And I just felt so bad because I couldn't ask him, do you want some lemonade? Because I didn't know what to do. So I went down the street and had the lady teach me the alphabet so that I could one day then say, do you, and spell it out with my hands to invite him to have a lemonade, well, to buy one. So that experience marked me. And then this lady says, yeah, and I'm also we're opening a deaf interpreting program at the University of Kansas. And as we talked more and more, she said, would you be interested in that program? And something clicked, and my life is like this. It's like these opportunities present. And if you say yes, it is going to take you down this crazy path, right? So I was just like, this is so wild. And since I'm kind of, I'm going to study somewhere different. I knew I was going to already study music, continue my music studies at UMKC, but I could work it out to be in both of those programs at the same time. So I spent a year doing a deaf interpretation sign language program at KU, which was probably that's what got me down my languages path. And I continued to study music at the conservatory at UMKC. I'm also singing in my little boy band and doing things there. And life just continues to just throw me all over the place. I end up going back to Graceland, where I'm now kind of done with my studies. So I'm there for a semester, and then I'm supposed to graduate at the in the second semester. And I have this, like, I'm done. Like, I have no more classes to take. And I had gotten into French. I had a friend that lived in Paris. She was studying a year abroad. And I went to visit her during spring break. And the year before. And that was just like, ooh, man, I really want to learn more French. And that was a really cool experience. Well, I was like, where can I go and learn French? And I had heard that Tahiti was like one of the most hospitable places in Community of Christ. And so that next year, it's like December, I buy a ticket to Tahiti because I've decided I'm just going to go and spend my last semester in Tahiti. And I worked with the school and I was like, if I go to Tahiti for a few months, what can that give me some, French credit? So I was able to get a minor in French. But I am just like creating my own little like last semester of what to do. The problem is I didn't know anybody in Tahiti. And I literally just called the apostle at the time and I said, hey, I've bought a ticket to Tahiti. And he's like, what? He's like, well, that's fine. Maybe we can connect you with somebody. He's like, how long are you going for? Probably thinking that I was going for like a week or two. And I'm like, oh, it's for the semester. It's for 3 months. So I also like to, I said that I created the counselor in training program to be a CIT. I think I also created World Service Corps. I like to give myself credit for that I just kind of like created this opportunity for myself to go. And he was a new apostle at the time. And so he got a hold of the former apostle who probably had a few more connections, who called me and said, Joey, I hear you've gotten yourself into a pickle. You've purchased the ticket and you're ready to go. So I have found a family that will receive you. And man, did that family receive me. And I got over there and connected with the people of French Polynesia in a way that changed my life forever. That experience was so strong that when I finished school, I decided I am going to learn French because I didn't speak it well while I was there at all. I was definitely in training. And I decided I'm going to learn French. It was expensive to live in Tahiti. And plus I wanted to continue my music, my musical desires. So I decided to go, I became a nanny in Paris, in France. And I decided to go to France and continue my music studies. So I started my master's program over in France in music at the conservatory there in Paris. And that's where it all happens in terms of the rest of my story. So I'm there, I'm watching a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old in this family, trying to learn this crazy language, enjoying Parisian life, trying to figure out a little bit of who I am and what's going on. I was in this huge vocal competition and I ended up taking like 3rd place, which was pretty cool because I had just arrived. I remember my French was so bad though that they asked me, you were supposed to sing a French song and then another song. And the people that took 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place, they actually gave a recital after that competition. And they asked me not to sing my French song. They asked me to sing 2 songs in Italian because they were just worried what people would think about my French pronunciation, which was hilarious. But I remember walking home after that. And that's where I was like, I had kind of this career and professional crisis. I was like, oh, I mean, I love music. Opera has been fun, but I really said yes to opera because of the opportunities it gave me. It kept kind of putting me on that path of more and more schooling to study in that way. And I was like, I started weighing, is that really where I want to be? And it's funny because that is kind of where I stepped out of the opera world. I continued in the music world, but it was interesting because what would have probably happened with my studies of opera, I probably would have lived in different countries, traveled a lot of places in the world and learned many different languages and used music all the time. And what have I done in my career in Community of Christ? Well, I've lived in different countries. I've traveled a lot of the world. I've been able to continue to use music, and I've learned several languages. At Christmas time, and this is probably the most important part of this story, at Christmas time, I went home to visit my family on that year that I was in France. My mom bought me a ticket to surprise my family at Christmas. But I had a friend from Graceland who contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm coming with this lady, Cindy Van Rossum, who lives in Holland. She's American, but she lives in Holland. Would it be okay if we stayed at your place?" And I'm like, "Well, I won't be here, but I can leave you a key. And if you want, you can come, and I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks." And so they came and took advantage of that. And Cindy Van Rossum, she was an adult, so she understood it's expensive to go and just visit Paris. And she wrote me the nicest letter. And when I came back home, I find, they probably left my apartment cleaner than I had left it for them. And she left candies on the bed, and then this note that said, "If you would like to, you should come and visit us in Holland, in the Netherlands." And so, of course, when I was finished with that year of school, I took advantage of that. And so I called her up and I said, "Hey, I'm going to get on a train and I'm going to come to the Netherlands." She happened to be married to the Mission Center president, the Europe president of the church at that time, Jerry Van Rossum, who, as good Mission Center presidents and ministers do, began to invite me into all the different things that he was a part of. And he was making a trip down to southern France. And he invited me to come and translate for that, which I was like, I still don't speak French that great, but sure, I'll go and do that. He took me to different places when he worked in the Netherlands and in Germany. And two of the really important kind of life-changing moments it was the same weekend. It's just that they held one in the Netherlands and one in Germany. And they were young adult weekends, which, just so you know, young adult at the time in Europe meant anyone from like 15 years old to 50 years old. So it was a large, diverse group of age ranges of people. But I go to this weekend in Germany, meeting these people who spoke this language that I had never heard. And I am like, where am I? And what is this? This is so cool. These people are so cool. And this is so different. And then we opened up these materials that at the time were called core values of the church. And today we would know those as what we call our enduring principles. And as I began to read these concepts of that every person has worth, and I read, we're better when we have unity in the diversity that we have, and just some of the ideas that God still speaks today, which I said that from the beginning. The Spirit is constantly moving in and around us. And I began to really lean into that. It was a huge shift in terms, I was always connected with church life. So I can't say that I was like on my way out of church or anything, but I was certainly in a stage of life where if we didn't begin to lean towards principled living as opposed to rule-based living, I think Community of Christ has always been principle-based. However, some of our principles had led to some pretty strict rules. And of course, I was a part of breaking some of those rules. We never danced in the church until I was in high school. And then we had our first, mission center dance that we were able to do. But hearing those principles gave me real hope, not only for who we were, but who we were becoming. I started to think about, man, if we really applied these things, these core values, these principles of life into everything we do, what type of world could we see emerge from that? So that was a turning point in my life. So I did that weekend in Germany. I did that weekend again in the Netherlands, met some of the people that have become the closest people in my faith journey over in Europe. I then went to that trip to southern France, where I stayed in Evelyn Bernard's house. She's a translator, French translator for the church. I had not met her. So I did not know her, but I'm staying in her house. And later after that, we would become, companions on the journey, I would say, on our French faith journey and her English speaking journey as a French English interpreter for the church. Those experiences led to just so many opportunities that when I came home, I remember calling that French family that I connected with down there and just being like, I just want to get back to France. I want to get back to be with you guys. Just meeting our church family over in Europe, it changed everything. And I wanted that international community to be a part of my faith journey for the rest of my life.
So one thing I want to pick up on that thread of unfolding life from college going forward is where did ordained ministry come in for you?
Oh, God has God's timing, right?
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm trying to getting the timeline of my life, even though I've told this story several times, but getting the timeline is a little challenging. But it was after my experiences in Europe.
Okay.
And I had come back, I'm probably 25 by then. And the person who had become pastor at my congregation that I had, only gone to for Christmas and times that I was back home, because I had this journey that was all over the place. But this person had known me since my childhood, had seen me grow up, and she gives me a call and says, can you come up to the church on such and such day at such and such time? And in a room she had prepared, she was one of those people that always created a perfect ambiance, and she had prepared a basket and we had communion, and I am like, I don't know what is going on. And then she says, you have a call to elder. And I'm like, what? And at the time, that just seems like such a role in the life of the church that I had no idea. I mean, I knew what it meant. I knew what elders did in Community of Christ, but man, I had never seen myself in that grouping of people. And I just was like kind of overwhelmed with that. And yet I know it was the reconnecting, the discovery of hospitality in French Polynesia, the connecting of this larger international faith community, that I was like, I want to be a part of that. Whatever's going on there, I want to be a part of that. And so I said yes, and was ordained as an elder, not knowing. And she very clearly said, this ministry that you are being called to may not happen in this congregation. It's like she knew that I was going to be doing other things.
Wow. So thank you for that.
You've been listening to an episode of Nice to Matcha, featuring a conversation between host Robin Linkhart and special guest Joey Williams. Be sure not to miss part 2 of this conversation, where Robin and Joey will explore more deeply Joey's journey in ordained ministry.